The New York City elections have been invaded by red boxing. Yes, red boxing is taking over. It's the new craze. This is Nuance, and I am Mike Scala. I'm an attorney, ready to get into this red boxing and the legalities behind it and what confuses me about it, so on and so forth. Of course, I'm joined, as always, by Jay Carter. He's a fellow hip hop artist and a chair of BLM Tokyo. Sometimes Jay, sometimes timid, but always on Nuance. What's going on, Jay?
Yeah, man. Red box, when you say that, it reminds me of that video rental service. Remember the boxes, the red boxes that used to be all over the place? I guess they still are, but where you could just rent stuff, videos
Yeah,
and stuff right
yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah.
So it's
You
like, yeah.
know, when you just said that, that reminded me of your Blockbuster story in Hawaii.
Right. It's still vivid and fresh in my mind.
Wow.
So we'll get into what this red boxing means, and it's not the video rental company. And we definitely appreciate comments and opinions on here. So yeah, so what is red boxing in this context?
So it relates to campaign finance, right? And I think a lot of people are familiar with the Citizens United decision, which was a very controversial Supreme Court case saying that money is speech, basically, when it comes to campaigns, right? Someone can spend as much money as they want independently to affect the outcome of a campaign. Now, we know that campaigns themselves are bound by campaign finance rules and laws, right? Which come with oftentimes limitations. Now,
Right.
that's especially true if you're in a matching funds program. Like here in New York City, there's a very strong 8-to-1 matching funds program, right? Where for every dollar a small donor gives, the city will match $8, right? So obviously that's a way to take some of the influence of money out of the system, right? And give more power to small dollar donors. Now, you may recognize the tension there, right? On the one hand, somebody can spend as much as they want independently to influence a campaign. On the other hand, campaigns themselves have limitations as far as what they can spend and what they can do financially.
And
So,
they should, but
and
let's
they
go.
should, right?
Yeah.
But what ends up happening, people sometimes try to get around this by utilizing the fact that actors outside of a campaign, like we said, can do what they want, right? That's considered by the
Mm,
Supreme Court to be a free speech issue, that the government can't come in and say, you can't spend your money how you see fit, right? So you can put ads on TV, you can send mail out to people, you can hire people to knock on doors, you could do whatever you want independently, right? In other words, not coordinated with the campaign. Why? Because
right.
if you were to coordinate with that campaign, that would be a way for the campaign to not be bound by the rules and limitations of campaign finance, right? And so,
Right.
for example, getting back to New York City, 8-to-1 matching funds, you take those matching funds, great, but you agree to not spend over a certain amount of money, right? And do certain things. Again, if you were to coordinate with these PACs, they call them political action committees and super PACs, right? These different outside groups, then what would be the point of the campaign finance limitations? You would just be getting around that by saying, well, the campaign isn't doing it. This other person is doing it. This other group is doing it. But if you're talking to them, if you're coordinating the messaging with them, it's the same as if you doing it effectively, right? And so
Right.
that's where this law comes in, that campaigns cannot coordinate with PACs. And what often happens is between election cycles, you'll see candidates or people involved in campaigns usually work with PACs or super PACs, right?
Mm,
They'll raise a ton of money, right? They'll spend a lot of money, obviously, because they're not bound by campaign finance limitations, but they won't declare themselves as an official candidate yet, or they won't get on a campaign officially, because once they do, that coordination law will kick in, right? They won't be able to coordinate
right.
anymore. And so they'll have to make a clean break from the PAC prior to officially joining the campaign. Now,
Right.
red boxing, right? What is the term red boxing? Red boxing is what is looked at as a way to get around the coordination rules, right? Because what campaigns now will do is they'll put information on their websites that signal to people who support them that this is their messaging. This is the messaging they want outside entities, maybe such as PACs, to put out, or maybe supporters, right? Someone who wants to volunteer, whatever. But the accusation is it's being done sometimes in a way that illegally constitutes coordination, right? Because if they're not picking up the phone themselves and saying, hey, PAC, we want you to put out an ad using this messaging, they've got a special section on their website that's like a wink, wink, I guess, right? It's like a signal to them that this is the messaging we want you to use.
Right. And you know, that reminds me of what was happening in or what happens in PR in what was happening at one point. They were writing maybe press releases in a way that looked like more like articles, so that journalists would just go ahead and use that instead of writing it, so that basically they were writing for the outlet themselves.
Right. That is still very prominent. In fact,
Yeah,
a lot of the press releases we put out were taken by local publications, and you know,
right,
they'll change some things around, maybe add some of their own reporting or format it for length, right, or whatever. But
right,
basically, what we're putting out becomes the basis of the article. Yeah, and
right.
it's a useful technique because it saves the publication from having to do that work, and therefore I think makes it more likely that they'll use your press release, your article, right? They'll publish an article based around your press release if it's written in such a way that lends itself to their format, right? So it's like almost like doing their work for them, but it also makes it more likely that what you want to say gets in that publication.
Right. What you want to say and how you want it said.
Right.
And that kind of skirts the tenets of independent journalism. Basically, you're controlling the narrative when it's not really supposed to be that way. But if journalists or publications get lazy and decide to do it that way, then that's what happens. So it sounds like it's something similar in that regard. In this case, though, it's a campaign that's trying to say, okay, this is how we want it covered and how we want it promoted and pushed.
Sure. Although in the case of the independent publications, I think there's still a duty for them to verify that information, right? So if
There
you send
is.
them a press release, hopefully they're not just copying and pasting it without somehow independently verifying what you're saying. Now, if you include things like quotes, well, that's kind of self-verifying, right? And I think this
Right.
maybe is how it ties to the campaign situation in a sense, right? A quote that you want someone to put in an article, if it's coming from you, right, if it's legitimate, is real. It's what you're really saying, right? You might not be telling the truth or whatever. It might be your version of things, but it truly is your quote. It really is your messaging, right? And
Yeah.
so if the reporter, if the article wants to quote you as saying that, well, they're not telling any lies. They're not, right? They're not misreporting anything. They're legitimately quoting what you said. Now, this is where it gets a little murky and I think confusing, even for me as an attorney, because where do we draw the line when it comes to illegal coordination, right?
Right.
To use that analogy of messaging, this is just the
Right.
campaign's message. Why is it wrong? Why is it improper for the campaign to put their messaging online? And why is it improper for a PAC or an outside group or an individual to use that messaging that reflects the campaign's narrative? I mean, that would seem to be natural.
I think that what you're describing right there is that loophole that they're kind of living in, right? Because it like you said, it's very natural to say that, you put up this information on your website. You're not explicitly saying use this in this way, but others are taking it and using it in that way. And it's like, where's the line? How do you judge what the
Right.
intent is or whatnot?
That's the
And
thing.
so it's a loophole in that regard.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it can be a loophole, I guess, if it's being used to get around the system. But
Right.
when is it improper, right? I mean, because messaging is messaging. So, for example, think of any campaign's website. Think of our website, because we weren't trying to red box or any of this stuff, right? We were just putting
Right.
our messages out there. All right.
Right.
Maybe we're not formatting it in such a way that a PAC might find useful. I mean, so maybe there's
Right.
that. But if you were to just look at, I don't know, the bio section, Mike Scala comes from New York City Public Schools or whatever. a PAC then goes and says, Mike Scala comes from New York City public schools. Vote for him. He's a public school board. Is that coordination? I mean, they're just taking our messaging, but why wouldn't they?
Right.
So when does it become improper? When does it cross that line? Is it a matter of formatting it in that way? Like, to get back to your example of the press release, is it that, like, here's something that could be used as a commercial? Just take this. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, where do you draw that line? How do you determine if it's red boxing, if it's improper, or how is it just seen as standard campaign messaging? It does seem like hard to figure out and maybe prone to abuse if you try to enforce it.
And not only that, but I guess you'd have to somehow try to prove intent, right? From the campaign to intentionally deliver this to the PACs, and for the PACs to have that coordination with it, you know what I mean? Because it's about coordination here, right?
Right.
So it has to be some kind of way to prove, or you're assuming that they've kind of communicated, or wink, wink, like, here, I'm putting this out and want you to do this. But how do you prove that? Like, how do you show that?
So Justin Brannan is a New York City council member from Brooklyn, Bay Ridge, right? He's running for New York City Comptroller. And he apparently took down a whole page from his website this past week because the New York City Campaign Finance Board sent out a memo that they were going to be stricter when it comes to red boxing. And apparently this particular page looked like red boxing. Now, I want to be clear, it's called red boxing, but it isn't necessarily an actual red box drawn on a page. Like, it isn't that obvious, right? Like, on this particular site, we've got a screenshot of it as it appeared prior to it coming down, right? This was just a media page. It said media, right? It didn't say the red box page. It wasn't drawn in a red box. It wasn't, hey, PACs use this. It wasn't wink, wink, right? It was just the media page. And it looks, from the screenshot, it looks to me pretty mundane. I mean, pretty regular as far as what you would expect to see on a page like that. I don't see how this screams illegal coordination. What it says is Justin Brannan, chair of the City Council Budget Committee, where he stood up to Eric Adams and Donald Trump to protect New Yorkers' taxpayer dollars. Now, okay, maybe that might be read as a line you might hear in a commercial. So maybe, he's kind of hinting you should make a commercial like that. But it also comes off as campaign rhetoric, right? Like, the campaigns put out.
Sure.
He's protected affordable housing, schools, and libraries, and added billions in funding for essential services. Justin has the budget experience we need in a comptroller. Now, yeah, again, if you're reading that like a commercial script, maybe, but does it have to be that? Can it just be the campaign putting out soaring rhetoric about their candidate, as they always do?
Sure. I think it's very murky in that regard. And that's what, some of the campaigns would probably say, like, we're just promoting our candidate. This is part of our campaign. This is what we do. What's wrong with that? But I mean, there's got to be some way where's that line to say, or that smoking gun that says, we see what you've done.
And that's the thing. If there's no smoking gun, can you penalize someone for this? Because it's probably not going to be, let's be honest, there's probably not going to be a smoking gun, right? It's probably going to be, here's a section of the website that just sounds like we're talking up our candidate, and maybe some people might look at it. Listen, political opponents, right? Rival campaigns are going to try to paint it in that light. Right. If that's what the campaign had in mind. I mean, I can probably go to any campaign website. We looked at a lot of the candidates running for mayor. We could probably go to any of their sites now, right? Go back to those sites and find something on there that we can point to and be like, oh, that's red boxing. They should lose their public financing, because that's what's happening in some cases. This Campaign Finance Board is holding back public funds from some campaigns. And the Andrew Cuomo campaign for mayor got hit with that. I think it was a $660,000 fine or matching funds that they weren't given. That? You're right. I don't want to say the wrong figure here, but the issue with that was they're alleging improper coordination. And apparently this originated from a complaint by Zelnor Marie, whose campaign we covered last week.
Right.
Here it is, $622,000. Okay. And so he did receive millions in matching funds, but he did lose an additional $622,000 in addition to, I think, matching funds that were withheld in the past. Because
that's not that's not a small amount.
Not a small amount. They're saying they have reason to believe, the Campaign Finance Board does, that there was improper coordination between the Cuomo campaign and a PAC supporting it known as Fix the City. What they're saying is there was an ad that was put out by this group called Fix the City. And they don't believe the ad was independent of the campaign. Now, we're not getting a whole lot of information here as to what they mean by that. Let's see. Because when they say the ad wasn't independent of the campaign, are they saying the campaign actively coordinated with the PAC? Because that will be obvious illegal coordination, right? Or is it a red boxing issue? Let's see. I'm on amny.com. I'm scrolling down on this article here. The headline, by the way, is NYC mayor's race. Cuomo gets 1.5 million in public funds, but CFB withholds another 622,000 over suspected improper coordination with super PAC. All right, so if you scroll down on this article, it does talk about Zelno Myrie making the complaint. It says here, okay, well, yeah, this is red boxing. It says the Campaign Finance Board believes Cuomo's campaign may have violated city campaign finance rules by making strategic information or data publicly available to entities that knew or should have known would utilize it, a practice known as red boxing. Now here, they
kind of— how do they prove that, though?
Right. Well, here's the thing. They kind of give you a little bit more information as to what the parameters are, right? Or how they look at this, because they put certain things in quotes. They put strategic information or data in quotes. They put knew or should have known would utilize it. Now that would be in law a negligence type standard, right? Even if you didn't know, you should have known. The reasonable person would have known somebody was going to take this and use it. But I think another key part of this is the strategic information or data. So they're talking about strategy here, right? Something that you're going to put out that is going to signal, or you should know will signal to someone that it will be used in a strategic way to promote your campaign. Still, okay.
I'm still trying to figure out how they can prove that, short of—
and don't you want people to do that? Here's the thing.
Short of messages that say, hey, use this.
Right.
It's a murky line. And I'm not saying it shouldn't be scrutinized. It absolutely should be, because we're talking about campaign finance and this is very important stuff. It's like, but how to figure out how it's being done to police it.
And you have to wonder also if there's an element of, is there a PAC actually supporting you? You know what I mean? Right? Like if, you're Andrew Cuomo, right? And you know that there's a super PAC out there that's going to be spending a lot of money in furtherance of your election. Does that elevate the scrutiny to a higher level because it's real, it's on, as opposed to some no-name candidate coming up that there's no PAC supporting them, there's nothing behind them, no one, you know what I mean? And then it's like, yeah, even if they put something on their website that could be used, no one would ever use it anyway. So how could you say they should have known who would be utilized? No one was going to utilize that. So, I mean, I wonder if that makes the analysis different.
And I think I'm looking at some of the things here, and timing seems to be one of the things that people are looking at. So let's say, for example, that super PAC that PAC is putting out messaging for the candidate that's along a certain sort of angle. And then the campaign puts up a page that complements that angle with information that they want added. And then it's like, okay, well, it looks a little suspicious. Like you followed the lead. Now you want to lead their messaging and you put it here for them to use.
Right. What if it was also, and I'm trying to really think of an example of this, but what if it was some kind of data or information that the voter might not be interested in, but the group, the PAC, might be interested in as far as their ads? The problem with that is, why would the PAC be interested in it in the first place if voters wouldn't? Because the PAC is trying to put out an ad that the voters are going to find appealing. So I don't know if that would really come into play. It says here that in late April, the Cuomo campaign had a page on its website called Message for Voters. Now, if this is an attempt at red boxing, they're being clever by saying message for voters. They're not saying message for PACs, right? So I wonder if there was some legal memo circulated saying, hey, if people are going to start accusing us of red boxing here, let's make it look like we're doing anything but, right? We're talking to the voters, not to the PACs. Funny message for voters, and that's the page they said was actually for the PACs. But it said that page, which the campaign has since taken down, had video clips of Cuomo that could be placed into ads, polling data, and ways to message specific communities. So,
but I mean, that just sounds like a regular ad that a campaign might put out anyway.
It kind of does. It kind of does. Although, if you put up a video clip and you say, "Hey, you can put this in an ad," they're probably not saying that though. It's probably just clips. So,
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like it's just content at
right,
the, you know?
right, and that's what I'm saying, right? Like we do the same thing. If I put up shorts on my social media of me out in the community, someone can come along there and say, "Oh, look, he's putting out content videos that could be used in ads." Yeah, they could be, right? But am I not allowed then to put out content to promote my campaign? And that's why I'm wondering if
Right.
this is going to start having a chilling effect on campaigns. Our campaigns going to be afraid to campaign, to put out their messaging out of fear that they'll be hit with a red boxing complaint.
Well, I think we should probably also wonder how often their campaigns are being hit with these complaints, to kind of gauge if it's really that kind of a problem for campaigns or not, or if it's just something that just popped up in this one. Maybe that candidate made that complaint to try
Sure.
to
Well, but
make
like,
up ground or something.
yes. But like we said, after this broke and the City Campaign Finance Board emailed the campaign saying they're going to be more strict with this, a candidate for controller, Justin Brannon, removed the media section from his website. So you could look at
So the
that
question then
cynically.
is, that's it. Go ahead.
I said you could look at that cynically, like he was red boxing maybe, and he did it so he didn't want to get in trouble, or
Right.
you could look at it like it was a legitimate media page his campaign was putting out, but now they're afraid they're going to be accused of that, and they don't want to lose their matching funds, and so they're trying to chill their messaging and saying, let's not even play with that. Let's not even put anything out there that could be construed as that. But that goes back to my
Right.
original question: what can't be construed as that? Because your bio, you can put that in the commercial. And in fact,
Sure.
I'll say this: I didn't even know, but you want to talk about not coordinating? I didn't know that there was a group supporting my campaign in 2021. I think they were affiliated with the UFT. I know the UFT endorsed me, right? But they were making phone calls apparently in support of my campaign because I found this on Google kind of recently where they submitted their call script to the Campaign Finance Board and it became a public record. And so if you
All
look
right.
up information about that campaign in 2021, that pops up. And like I said,
All right.
I didn't even know they were doing it, right? They never even told me. No one told me. I never even heard from a vote. No one told me, right, that was happening. But after the fact, I saw it. I encountered this call script. And if you read the call script, they're using some of the information that's on our site.
All
So
right.
why wouldn't they? Right? I mean, if you're going to instruct people to call voters in support of a candidate, you've got to give them some kind of information, something that they're telling these voters. What are you going to do? You're going to make it up? I mean, why wouldn't you take it from the candidate's website and publicly available information?
Right.
Especially
I mean,
because you can't talk to them, right? They can't call me and be like, "What should we tell them?" That's coordination. So they're getting it from what's out there, what's online.
yeah, it's a murky line. I would imagine whoever is regulating that and actually making those penalties or enforcing this is has you know what's the word here? Preponderance of evidence when they go and make these things. You know
I don't
what
know. I know what that means. I'm not sure how you're trying to use it.
what I
Preponderance.
mean, like they have a not just an accusation, but they have evidence to prove that this is
Yeah,
what it is, that
I
what
don't
they're
think.
being accused of, not just take an accusation and then
Mhm.
automatically say, okay, you're red boxing, we're coming
Well,
after you.
right. Well, the
You know
way
what I
it works
mean?
is you make a complaint with the campaign finance board, and then they do an investigation. And
Right,
what happened here? They made a preliminary finding, right? So yeah, it's a preliminary finding. Now, every minute matters, every day matters, especially now. You're coming down to the wire in New York City. The primary is next month, and so
right,
when they hand out their money, right? It's just on the calendar. Right? They review your records and figure out if you're eligible for matching funds. If they make a preliminary determination that you don't qualify for this round of matching funds, you don't get the money now. Now you can go through the appeals process, right? Try to get it overturned, but that could be later on or maybe even too late. Maybe that might be after the primary by the time you win your appeal with them. You know what I mean? So like I said, the time is of the essence here. And so even if it's a
right,
preliminary determination, it's not the final disposition of the case. It nonetheless can have
right.
a very serious impact on the campaign.
Sure, sure, sure. So, all
Yeah.
right.
So
Interesting. If anyone has any experience with that, it'd be interesting to hear how they determine or if how it was determined that you or your campaign was guilty of doing this, or if you know of any explicit examples, it'd be interesting to hear about that, in the comments.
yeah, yeah. Like I said, I'm just a little baffled by all this. I understand, obviously, how it comes to be and why there's a concern about it, right? Why there's an
Right.
effort to crack down on that. But in
Sure.
practice, how do you draw the lines prudently, right? In a way that doesn't have a chilling effect on campaigns, in a way
Right.
that doesn't improperly deny campaigns of matching funds, right? In a way that doesn't incentivize abuse. We've talked about that in the past.
Right.
There were efforts to pass legislation, I think, to say that if a candidate was accused of a crime, they couldn't get matching funds even without being convicted. And
Right. Right.
that was
Right.
a dangerous line to walk because that would just encourage accusations being made. Well, I feel like we're looking at that
Sure.
again here, right? It just seems to, look, a rival campaign filed a complaint alleging red boxing. What they said was there was a website, and on their website was
Right.
information that a PAC used. Okay, is that red boxing? Should we require more? Should we require
Well,
proof?
I would imagine, like you said, there's an investigation that started. So, as long as they're not being denied based off of the ex accusation alone, then I think more is, sounds like more is being required.
Well, but should you have to prove intent, for example? I mean, to say they made a strategic, well, they made a determination that strategic information or data publicly available to entities that knew or should have known would utilize it, and that's red boxing. I mean, to me, that doesn't strike me as the best standard. You're making
There's
strategic
got to be some
information
supporting. There's got to be something that supports
some
it.
kind of intent, but then again, it's going to be so hard to prove intent without looking at people's emails and text records and things like that, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So
So, um,
yeah, but then again, what I'm thinking of too, the fact that we even have to wrestle with all of this, right, with coordination in the first place, and campaigns trying to get around the rules in these weird ways, and is this just free speech? Is it allowed? Is it illegal coordination? Is it red box? The fact that we even have to worry about this and deal with this maybe speaks to a larger issue here. Maybe it speaks to the fact that number one, money does have too much of an influence in politics, and number two,
absolutely.
maybe we need to rethink cases like Citizens United. Maybe we shouldn't have to have this clunky kind of framework that can never really make sense. The fact that it doesn't make sense maybe shows you that the overarching law is wrong. What do you think about that?
No, absolutely. I mean, listen, I believe we both have had opposition to Citizens United from the beginning, about being able to saying that corporations are people, or campaign donations is allowable to any level, and you know maybe we again that should be repealed.
Mm,
Obama even remember Obama stood up and publicly admonished the Supreme Court over upholding it
right.
in one of his, I think it was a State of the Union addresses. I think he did that. Um, yeah, that there's obviously too much money in politics. Obviously, we just saw Elon Musk basically buy his way into the White House with like a what couple hundred million or whatever that he spent to get into the
That
fold.
was done independently too, wasn't it?
Right. Right. And the result of that is, he's the head of a government organization, not government organization.
He
Even
was,
Congress
right?
people don't know what it
Didn't
is.
he step down by now? But he was.
I don't know if he stepped down yet, but he was, and then that put him in control of a lot of purse strings in
Right.
the U.S. government, and into some very top secret information. So
So
we've
yeah, go ahead. Let's
it's,
finish that.
I was gonna say money in politics is a big issue that we've known for a long time, and it's not a partisan issue.
Right.
I think all parties recognize there's too much money in politics. The point is, when what are they willing to do to
Mm,
stop it when it's other than take advantage of using it for their campaigns? They've got to
sure.
have some point to stop it.
Yeah. Well, the flip side of that though is, let's say you have money and you want to spend it on messaging. Forget about campaigns for a second. Let's say you just believe in something and you want to spend your money to promote that idea, right? Should there be a limit as to how much money you can spend of your own to promote an idea that you believe in?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, but there should only be a limit, you think, when it comes to directly affecting campaigns.
Yeah.
Okay, that may make sense, right? I mean, because that line could be a little murky as well, right? If someone puts out a, I don't know, let's say they believe in uh, reproductive choice, right? They put out ads on TV promoting that idea. They're not saying
Right.
vote for this candidate, vote for this party, or whatever, but they just spend $1
Right.
billion putting ads on TV about how it's so important we have reproductive freedom in this country. Well,
Right.
if there's an election going on at that time and you've got, let's say a Democrat who really supports that and a Republican who's against it, that could be seen as spending money to meddle in that election as well, even if you're not directly saying vote for this candidate.
Yeah. I think in that case, it's just kind of it is what it is at that
Mm,
point. It's like I said, it's not direct campaign spend. It at that
right.
point it's kind of issues spend. You know what I mean? Which I don't know if we can block people from doing that. But campaign spend, direct campaign spend, should definitely be curtailed, especially with the economic imbalance in the country, because that would just mean
Mm.
that a certain faction could control every election that comes through, and that kind of undermines the whole idea of a democracy and a participative
Isn't that kind of the
situation.
system that we are living under as it is?
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that's what people are complaining about.
Right, right. That's basically what we have now. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, it's and we know this, right? The ultra rich, and it's not demonizing people that become successful and whatnot, but they have means and connections that can influence things to a greater degree, that is probably um, against what democracy is supposed to
oh,
stand for.
so if you were to, let's say, write a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, right? How would you frame it? Would you not outlaw spending as much of your money on ideas, but you would say there's a limit when it comes to what directly supporting or opposing a candidate for office?
Probably. I mean, of course, it'd have to be thought through.
Mm.
You're talking about an amendment.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
gotta really kind of sit down and think about how it'd be used in all different ways.
sure,
But
sure.
I think in general,
Yeah.
something like that, yeah. Because honestly, it should, first of all, it shouldn't cost that much to run for office in the first place. It shouldn't require all that type of money. We're talking, it's went from a couple million to now billions of dollars. It's a
Right,
big business at this point, and uh,
right.
it cuts a lot of people out of the fold as well. And so, yeah, I think in general that sounds like it'd be something that would make sense.
It does make sense to me also because, look, I understand the free speech concerns on the other side of it, but
Sure.
if there's a limit as to how much money I can directly give to a campaign, let's say for a certain race, I can only give $1,000 to a
Right.
candidate, right? Okay. That seems to suggest that the law doesn't want me to speak with more than $1,000 for that candidate, right? So, like, why would I be able to skirt that by saying, well, I'm not going to give you the $1,000, but I'm going to spend $1 million on ads saying to vote for you? Well, isn't that kind of undercutting the spirit of the law in the first place, which was there's a limit? $1,000 of your money is all that we want going to that candidate, essentially. So, I
I
mean,
think
it makes sense to say there's a limit as to what you can spend if there's a limit on what you can give.
I think not if the spend isn't saying vote for this candidate, right? Um, if you go ahead and you're spending independently and you're saying, hey, I'm Jon Snow, and I'm I believe this candidate is going to be the best for my county, my state, or whatever, and then he spends like $1 million, $2 million on that. That is, to me, it's a pretty clear direct
Right.
campaigning for. this
Right.
candidate.
Right.
Now, if
Which,
he
by the way,
says,
is perfectly legal under the current law unless you're coordinating with that campaign.
right, and so as versus if he spends the million or 2 million and saying, you know what, I'm Jon Snow, and I think that this is necessary for our state, etc. I think it's a little bit different. Oh, I'm getting a call here.
Is that someone trying to get on Nuance? Oh. So
So
yeah, I mean,
and
it
that
is
could be
interesting.
murky too. You know
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
mean?
exactly. What if they just repeat the whole platform of the other candidate? They don't say vote for anyone, but they say, I'm I'm John Doe, and I think that these ideals will be perfect for our state.
Did
And
we wait? Did we just make the case for red boxing scrutiny right here?
for red boxing scrutiny, or are we playing
Kind of
devil's
similar?
advocate? I don't know. I think we're playing devil's advocate when it comes to overturning Citizens United, or trying to figure out, I guess, where the limitation
Right,
should be. Um,
right,
Acknowledge that it's not a black and white issue, right? There are shades of gray
right.
here.
Sure. And right. I mean, if he went, if say for example, this theoretical person went down and kind of just basically outlined a candidate's platform, um, it would be kind of obvious that this is what he's doing. And
Mm.
there definitely needs to be some kind of control in that regard. But I think in general, we wouldn't want to curtail
Right.
uh, citizens being able to promote ideas that they are supportive of. It'd be
We're
like, what
we're
about,
kind of back to the beginning now, aren't we? And this is kind of how we started the whole discussion. Like, you
that's what I
know,
mean. Like
yeah,
it's kind of a link.
we're kind of like going in a circle here, right? You're a citizen, you're able to speak and put your ideas out there, but at what point does it become either coordination if you're getting
Right.
information, I guess, from the candidate's website, which is kind of a weird thing in the first place. But all right, if the campaign is intentionally putting information out there publicly that they know you're going to use in a commercial, that can be seen as coordination. That's what they call red boxing. Fine. But then what about, like we just posited, you're not saying vote for this person, vote against this other person. You're just
Right.
taking the whole platform and saying, oh, aren't these great ideas? They're my ideas also. Aren't they great? I mean,
Right.
isn't that kind of the same thing without using the name? And then if you try to police that, aren't you back to trying to discern what intent, trying to figure out what they really are trying to do here, trying to figure out,
Sure.
is there coordination? What's really behind this? Does that lead to potential abuse? Like we said with this red boxing thing, right? Does it chills people's speech, make people afraid to speak out because they think they'll be accused of illegal coordination or campaign spending or whatever? So we are in troubled waters, I think, trying to police all that.
Right. 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 I think one thing that's also in this example is interesting. It just kind of crossed my mind that in general, people don't just pay for advertising to talk about the things that are important to them,
Mm-hmm.
especially during campaign season. So that could be one way to be like, hey,
Oh,
look, we're,
you
we're
just
seeing
hit
what you're
on
trying to do here, buddy.
something there during campaign season, right?
Right.
Now, in the New York State legislature, for example, they have what they call blackout periods where legislators can't use their mail that they get for free, right? They get a certain amount of mail just by virtue of their being in office that they can send to constituents. And what they do is they send out newsletters, look at all the great work we've been doing around town, right? Here's me cutting the tape at the hospital, whatever. Building this new computer lab. Here's a giant check, right, for the school. You see all that kind of stuff. And even though it's from the government coffers, if you will, right? It's not paid for by campaign money, it's paid for by
Mm,
taxpayer money. It isn't seen as a campaign move, a campaign spend, because it is looked at as informing the public of what they've been doing in office, right? They're allowed to educate the people on what they've been up to. Well,
right.
because it can be seen as campaigning, especially close to an election, there are rules that they can't do that a certain number of days prior to an election, right? It's called the
Makes
blackout,
sense.
right? Because even though it's coming from the government and it's their newsletter from the government saying what they've been doing, there's an election coming up. And of course, they're trying to paint themselves in the best light possible. And that creates an
Right.
unfair advantage against any opponent who
Sure.
doesn't have that luxury, right? So that's something, by the way, that exists regardless of the blackout period. It's tough to run against an incumbent for many reasons, that being one of them. They get to use government
Sure.
resources to promote themselves throughout the year. At least this is blackout period where they can't do it so close to an election. So getting back to your point, maybe that could be part of the rule, right? If we were to draft new rules, new laws on this, maybe we would say something like, okay, we understand you have a First Amendment right to speech, and putting out a commercial on TV, for example, or sending out a mailer, whatever, that falls under speech, but there are limitations when it comes to using it to improperly influence a campaign. And maybe when it comes close to an election, we're going to be looking at that with more scrutiny. Maybe we're going to be putting more restrictions on it right before an election.
You know what that opens up though? That opens up another question. We're seeing these days where presidential campaigns seem to be lasting 2 years or
Sure,
more.
sure.
And so like that's half of a whole presidential term. So it's like if we put a blackout date, so you can't do it during the campaign season, like that's
Oh,
that's
it
a
would be.
big swath of
Oh, no, no,
time.
no. But it would be defined with a number. It wouldn't just be like
I'm just saying though, but
that year. You would say like 90 days before the campaign or something like that.
yeah, but
Before the
if
election.
people are campaigning for 2 years, like you're still doing it in the middle of the season. That kind of
Yeah.
it's you know what I mean?
You never not campaign, right? If you're in public life, you're always
Right.
campaigning. And
But I
so,
mean, like when you say from when you launch your campaign, right? I guess that's where you can
mhm,
officially say, okay, I'm in the race.
right.
And then, now we can say, okay, well, they're officially in there. If they haven't said they're in, then,
Mhm.
it's kind of ambiguous at that point. But I'm just saying, like, as far as a blackout period, when you've got campaigns that are running for multiple years, that blocks out a huge amount of time that says you can't, as an individual, you can't promote these kind of ideas.
Right. But
It's
we
again,
probably
it's
wouldn't,
murky. It's
yeah,
murky.
yeah. But we probably wouldn't draw it in terms of when someone announces their campaign, like the way it is in the legislature. The blackout period is a certain number of days prior to the election. I think it's either 90 days, 120 days, whatever it is. So it'll be
Right.
something like that. But you're right that it seems like we're always in campaign mode. And there are also, by the way, always elections happening. And so isn't it
Right.
90 days prior to every election? Okay, well, there's a primary. There might be another primary this year. There's a general election. Next year, there's going to be
Right,
another
right.
primary. So is there always kind of a blackout period? I mean, it's like on, off, on, off, on, off constantly,
Right, right. So
unless it's the election that you're trying to influence. But then again, they could not say they're trying
they're
to
all related.
influence. You're right. And hey, listen, I just happen to believe the property tax should be capped at this percent, and by coincidence, so does this candidate over here. Who would have thunk it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It just highlights how complicated it all is. Like you said, it's not black and white.
right,
And I think that also to me that also speaks to the need to have investigators that are on duty and bipartisan and um, keeping an eye on some of these things, even if we do have protections in place, like overturning Citizens United, you still need people that are watching out so that our elections are as free and as fair as possible.
mm, yeah, yeah. It's just it seems like there's no perfect system here either, right? Because we just
No, it doesn't
talk through
seem,
it.
yeah.
Whatever we came up with, we were able to poke holes in our own system.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So
So,
yeah,
and I think, and I think that exercise
hmm
is a valid one
hmm
because in order to find, as we like to quote a lot, in order to form a more perfect union, you have to try to find not only good ideas, but poke holes in those ideas as well, so
right,
that you can get the best system possible.
right, right. That's what they teach you in law school, and I like using that in my legal practice, right? And I think sometimes clients get offended or taken aback when
Mm,
you question them on the case they present to you, right? Because they'll come to
Right.
you and they're like, I got a perfect case. It's a slam dunk, open and shut case, no problem. And then you start pushing back a little bit. Well, wait a minute, but are they going to say this? And they're like, well, what do you mean? That's like, no, I'm on your side.
Right.
I'm not trying to say you're wrong. I'm trying to figure out how the other side is going to attack our argument so that we can
Right.
have a stronger argument, so we can be prepared for it, right? We want to be
Right.
prepared for the weaknesses or the perceived weaknesses, so that maybe they're not, maybe they're actually strengths, but we need to kind of drive at that. We can't just take it for granted because you say it's the perfect case. I'm not even going to question it. No, because it's an adversarial system, much like politics. The other side
Right.
is going to question it and they are going to poke holes in it, right? So we need to know.
Right.
We need to know exactly what they're going to say so that we're prepared to come back.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So
Yeah.
interesting. So
All right. Well, let's do a poll, see what the people out there think. And then we did want to briefly take a look at the other two candidates that we didn't look at yet, since we've, I think, covered just about all of them. But the ones we
right.
didn't were the presumptive Republican nominee and the incumbent mayor. Go figure. What a weird time when he's on our fourth show, because that's, I guess, his standing in the current election. But here we are. So the poll question of the week is, are you concerned about campaigns improperly coordinating with political action committees? And of course, that whole
Good.
red boxing controversy is a part of that. You know, I want to know, do you also think that's going to have a chilling effect on speech?
Right. Yeah. So we'll see what's going on.
All right. Well, let's do it. I have not looked at these websites. I want to go into them blindly. And we can't spend a whole lot of time because we're running out of time here. But let's just take a look at either Eric Adams or Curtis Sliwa. Which one do you think should go first?
Let's go with Adams.
All right. Does he even have a website?
That's a good question. That is a very good question.
Wow, I just Googled Eric Adams for mayor 2025, and let's see, one, two, three,
I
four,
don't see a
five. I don't
website.
see a website. I got 6 stories that came up, 7 stories. Does he not have a website?
It does not look like he has a website.
Wow.
That's interesting.
Why
Let's see,
would
does
he
he even
not?
have a personal website or any kind of promotion? Like, interesting. Um, I'm a little what is befuddled.
Perplexed. Yeah.
Now let me ask, well, no, I mean, I was gonna say every time anything you put up from Eric Adams, everything comes up as social media for uh his mayoral duties. Um, I wonder if that's on purpose. Oh wait, here we go. We have Eric Adams for mayor Instagram page, but the last post was 2023, so he has not
Wow.
used that since then.
So what's going on here? We talked about red boxing and people's true intents. What is Eric Adams' true intent? It doesn't seem like his true intent is to win this race. Why is he still in it?
That's a good question. Because yeah, there's nothing here. So what is it? What is his true intent? Um, is there anything that's he's not ahead in the polls either.
No,
Um,
barely registering, not even a blip.
right. So is he still in the race?
Yeah, as an independent.
But is he though? Or is he just saying he is just to
I think he's seeking 2 ballot lines in the general. I guess we'll have to see how that plays
mm,
out. But remember, one
mm.
of them was stop anti-Semitism or something like that. I think we
He
touched
just he just instituted something in that regard, some policy in that regard. He launched a new mayoral office to combat anti-Semitism in New York
right,
City.
right. But I believe one of the ballot lines he was seeking had that title.
Mm.
So here's something else. I just Googled Curtis Sliwa for mayor. He is the presumptive Republican nominee. He, of course, was the Republican nominee last time.
Curtis who?
Curtis Sliwa. He doesn't
Okay.
appear to have a website either. Wait a minute.
Interesting.
It does say here, visit my website. This is Instagram. That's weird. When I Google Curtis Sliwa for mayor, I get Wikipedia, I get Instagram, Curtis Sliwa for NYC mayor. I got a New York Post headline, why Curtis Sliwa thinks he should be New York City's mayor. I don't see a website here at all. However, when you scroll all the way down, there is a link. Let's see if this is even active. On Instagram, there's a post that says, visit my website, sliwafnyc.com. So let's see if that takes you anywhere. And if it does, why doesn't that come up in Google? Is it not Googleable?
That could be a SEO issue. It could be just,
Okay, here we go. He does
poor
have a website.
content.
It is
He
online.
does.
Yeah,
And it did not come up at all.
it did not. Let me send you the link.
I'm on the site
You're on
here.
the site.
Why is he wearing a red beret?
Because he's the founder of the Guardian Angels. That's his whole thing.
Oh, was he? Interesting.
Yeah.
That sounds that that sounds like it would be in opposition to someone running on the Republican line.
Why?
Because they were, at least the image that I have of the Guardian Angels were that they were, a group that was there to protect the people, something that would align more with, um, liberal ideology,
No, his whole
than
thing is anti-crime. That was the Guardian Angels thing. It was stopping crime. Some looked at it kind of like vigilantism, even though they weren't out there really doing vigilante stuff like what's the name, Bernie Getz. I think they came to his aid. Remember Bernie Getz, the guy on the subway? They called
right.
the subway vigilante. But that's the premise, right? They're out there deterring crime, and so he is running as a law and order, tough on crime candidate, which is how it fits with the Republican brand.
I suppose so. I think, not growing up in New York City, the image of the Guardian Angels probably was a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, they were citizens that bonded together to kind of protect the streets and protect the citizenry.
Right.
Um, and yeah, so, and I don't
Yeah.
know how true it is.
The whole idea was because that the crime was out of control in New York
Right,
City, especially on the subways, right? And so
right.
it's the whole tough
And
on
at the time, let's be
crime message.
fair, at the time it was crazy.
So I just sent you a picture in the chat there. That was, I guess, him in the 70s when that first came about.
Right. So interesting. Um, okay, so let's look at his site. Um, right off the back. Okay. His the red beret is branding is very prominent.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
Very prominent.
By the
Um,
way, we'll look at his issues in a minute here. Uh,
mhm.
I don't want to come off as anti-guardian angel on a whole either. I think it's a complicated issue, right? I think you can certainly criticize a lot of it. You can also, like you said, find good, especially for the time when it first came about, right? So, it's a big part of the history of New York City, for better or for worse, right? And
Sure.
I don't mean to be talking down on it. I think that if you take a look at his more recent ideology or stances on issues, you're going to find a lot to criticize, right? I don't think it,
Mm.
well, I guess we'll do it, but let me not speak for you. For me, I don't support much of the ideology. I understand the need to be tough on crime in certain instances, but there were times when it seemed to go overboard, right? For example,
Okay.
when the migrants were coming in large numbers, right? Especially in the beginning of Eric Adams' term, you would see these rallies pop up, and he would be behind a lot of them, and they really got ugly. And maybe it's unfair to blame him for all of that, but they devolved into what I would describe as xenophobic,
Mm.
borderline racist rallies, and even some of the rhetoric I think coming from him was questionable. So,
Well, let me ask you this. As someone who's much more knowledgeable about the guardian angels. Do you think that the ideology that you said that he's kind of devolved to, or those rallies kind of devolved to, do you think the guardian angels of the 70s and 80s would have supported that ideology from how they moved and presented themselves back then?
That's a good question. It's always hard to look at a figure from a certain time period and then kind of superimpose them into a different time period. It's kind of like looking at, I don't know, Alexander Hamilton or or Thomas Jefferson. Like, would they be a Democrat or Republican today? I mean, in certain areas, they might seem more aligned with one, certain maybe aligned with another. I will say
Right,
the Bernie Getz controversy sticks with me, right? That was, like we said, the subway vigilante. He apparently was looking for trouble. Again, put it in the proper context of the time. There was a lot of crime, a lot of craziness happening in New York City, and especially
right,
subways. But this guy seemed to be a little bit off mentally, right? And he was looking for trouble. He took a gun into the subway and was riding around hoping he would get bothered by somebody so that he would have an excuse to use the gun, it seemed. And that's what ended up happening. And at the time, they were pretty supportive. I mean, there was a documentary that came out a couple of years ago. It seemed like, Curtis and them were out in this guy's corner, standing up for him when that was going on. And
mm,
someone like me didn't think he was a hero, right?
mm,
I can acknowledge crime is and can be a problem, but I'm not in support of vigilantism of any kind. And I don't think you should be standing up for someone who does that kind of thing, regardless of what you think about the underlying issue, right? You want to be tough on crime, fine, but that doesn't mean you support a guy riding around the subway with a gun shooting at people.
right.
So to answer your question, I don't know, right? I mean,
Okay.
some of the stuff back then it was a little suspect, even then.
Okay, okay, okay.
Yeah. With
Yeah.
that said, I think he's a nice guy. Every time I've seen him, he's been nice to me. I did a few events in Ozone Park where the Guardian Angels were at. There's one fellow, I don't know his name, but he seems to show up to a lot of local events, and he's dressed in a red beret also, and the whole Guardian Angel outfit, so you can't miss the outfit. And he's always going, "Hey, Mike, how you doing?" Very friendly. I think most of them have good intentions, even if we may disagree with some of the finer points of their ideology, which we can now look at on Curtis Sliwa's side, at least, where see where he stands.
Okay. All right. Well, let's take a look at what we've got here. One of the he's got a prominent headline here. It says you put in the work to live here, you deserve a mayor who will help you stay here. So affordability, rising crime, homelessness, these are things he's looking at here. Um, so let's check out his platform. He's got four main points here: public safety, housing, revive NYC, and education. Let's look at some public safety.
Okay, public safety for all, he says.
Well, I like that.
For safety
I,
matters.
yeah, he's talking about hiring 7,000 new police officers. I want to know if there's any sort of accountability for that.
It says Governor Hochul and Mayor Adams have resorted to gaslighting you, saying crime is a perception. I assure your public safety concerns will never be ignored or belittled. There's something interesting about that point, and I think we've touched on this in the past. That perception does become reality. Now, some people
Sure,
will point to numbers. They'll point to raw numbers. They'll be like, "Oh, look, crime is down. Therefore, you shouldn't worry." But that's not a winning message politically, because maybe it is on the whole. Maybe there's a spike on the subway or in certain areas where people are
sure,
experiencing it, right? Maybe people are feeling it for whatever reason more. Does the media play a role in that? Sure, right? There are a lot of factors that go into it. But at the same time, you can't be dismissive of what people are sensing and perceiving out there, right? You shouldn't lie. You shouldn't distort the facts, right? The numbers are what they are, but the
right,
numbers don't tell the whole story either. I think I got some flack when I once quoted Joe Budden, right? And I said, I hate to break it to you, numbers always lie. But it's true, right?
sure,
In a certain sense, right? In that numbers don't tell you the whole story, especially when you're dealing with something like politics, which, let's face it, is an emotional sport in some ways, right? And there are people I think who want to be dismissive of people's feelings, like basically saying that you're in a fantasy world, right? You're I don't know, not paranoid, delusional, I guess is the word, right? Like
Right.
but again, that's not how you win votes. Perception is reality. And I think what people are feeling is valid and
Yeah, absolutely.
deserves to be addressed, right? Aside from just being brushed aside.
Right. But and on the same token, like you said, perception is reality and what people are feeling is valid, is absolutely true. And then the flip side is that the promotion of certain messages could make people feel a certain way, um, basically manipulate the way people feel, whether it's true or it's not true.
Sure, sure.
So that has to be considered as well. Um, I like some of the points that he's got here. Like, he's got hiring 7,000 new police officers is one, but his second point is deploying an emotional support and social worker task force to the subway stations, which I think is a very good call. And a lot of people have been calling for that type of action so that police officers aren't being deployed in these types of situations. You
Right.
know, you don't deploy a hammer when it requires, a screwdriver.
Mm.
And this will help not only cut down on the burden on the police force, but also should elevate the positive responses that are needed here. He points out, it decreases costs. Um, People are less likely to commit certain issues arising from mental health when they're faced with mental health professionals. Um, so I think that's a good idea there.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm scrolling through this page and we're still on just the public safety page. I'm not finding a whole lot that seems extreme or too
I'm not either so
right.
far.
It seems like maybe he is trying to moderate the policy here because he at least comes off in campaign settings as
Right.
kind of like a far right extremist type, right?
Right.
Um, and maybe, like I said, some of that is unfair. Maybe it's the people he surrounds himself with, and I don't like to
Hmm.
criticize people for that. But he also, he also, I guess, owns it to a certain degree as well, right? Because he would need to push back against that and say, hey, that's not me. And aside from what we're
Right.
seeing here, he doesn't seem to distance himself from that crowd, from that too much. Like I said, those rallies really, in my opinion, were hate rallies
Mm.
that he was leading. You know what I mean? So
So it could be a case of, what's printed on the page sounds good, but the way that he's implemented it could be, um, you know, uh, not the way it's being presented.
it could be a few different things, right? I mean, maybe he
Sure.
actually is more moderate than his image paints him.
Right. That could be another route. So the only thing that I'm not seeing here that I would like to see, as far as in this safety thing. There's a lot of good points here. He's talking about, safety in the subway, talking about safety for women, um, cleaning up shelters and helping the homeless. All of that sounds really good. Improving communications between NYPD precincts. That sounds on the surface like something that is really necessary. I don't see anything about holding bad actors accountable in the police force, and that I would like to see,
Mm.
because that is a real problem, and it's something that hurts the public, but also something that hurts the police force and the impressions of the police force.
And that's perhaps a limitation of Republican platforms, right? Because if you were to put something like that on there, that might be read by them as
Right.
anti-police and
Right.
cost you support.
Right. And he's not if you go down to the last point on here, he says hold city agencies accountable for
Right.
safer streets.
Right.
So he's not opposed to holding, to pushing for accountability, but it does not mention holding police and the police force and law enforcement accountable.
One good thing about him, I wonder if this is going to be on these four major sections here. He is very pro animal, very strong when it comes to animal rights.
Okay, okay. You said that and it immediately popped into my head. Like on the front page, there's that video that's popping up. There is a shot in there that goes by where he's sitting with like a golden retriever, like
Yeah.
petting the dog.
So I'm
Um,
looking at Revive NYC right now on his site.
okay, let's move on here. Revival for every community in NYC. Again, he's with the every.
Right, right.
Housing that works for New
Inclusive.
Yorkers, not just developers.
So
Good messaging.
yeah, this section here, it looks like it could be, well, I guess it's like it pulls from both sides of the aisle. He says politicians have only one answer: tax and spend your money and give breaks
Mm.
to billionaires and corporations. So
Right?
that's like a populist kind of message.
Mm. My plan for affordable housing. Stop corporate developers from pricing working families out of middle class areas. That that sounds like a good thing. That does not sound like a Republican position, really. Um, expand rent stabilized options for working families on fixed incomes.
I wonder, here's a cynic in me. I wonder if he had some advisors who said, listen, if you realistically want to win an election in New York City, you can't
Mm,
come off as a Trump Republican. Your policy has to be a little bit more moderate so that you won't scare independents who are more in the middle and even left leaning away. Because in theory, there is a path, and I don't think it's a realistic one, but here it is, right? If he were to win the election, it would be because of a split vote. In New York City, we don't have ranked choice voting in general elections. So the vote can very much
mm,
be split in the fall. And what if you had Eric Adams, Cuomo, and Mamdani, for example, in the general election, along with Curtis Sliwa, right? If they're all competing for the same slice of the pie, and he comes in with a strong Republican base, in addition to picking off
mm,
some independents and even some Democrats here and there, right? There could be a path. Now, the problem with that is I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think the Democratic vote, the general election vote is going to be split that way, right? I think even if you were to see, let's say Cuomo, Adams, and Mamdani on the ballot, they're not all getting a bunch of votes. We saw Adams don't even got a website, bro. You know what I mean? So it's like I think Cuomo
Uh,
is dominating that block.
yeah, 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 absolutely, absolutely.
However, you could envision a scenario where the progressives are really upset that Mamdani didn't get it right, and they refused to vote for Cuomo, and the Democrats have the split between them, and he comes, but he can't do it with just Republican votes. Like we said, he would have to expand the coalition. So maybe there's a
Right.
theory here, right? That if he really wants to make a play, he's going to take the Republican votes for granted almost and try to appeal to people outside of that base.
Right, right. Yeah, that would make some kind of a sense because, he's not going to be able to win on just Republican votes alone. So he would have to make some kind of an appeal
Yeah.
to some people that are on the line or whatnot. Now, I'm looking at the bottom of this Revive NYC, and this could be a point where some of what we might have well, I don't know if we might have suspect, but where it doesn't match what the other messaging is.
Mhm.
It's a little more of a hardline right wing. So the last point here is addressing housing insecurity. Now it starts off really nice as NYC has an affordability crisis. We understand that. We know that's very true. Then he goes on. Instead of helping struggling New Yorkers, the city spent billions to house, feed, and provide medical care for migrants, while working class families and homeless were left behind. There's no compassion in allowing New Yorkers to suffer while politicians spend taxpaying dollars on migrant crisis they created. Um, so there's a little bit of what I would have suspected from the beginning, as far as the Republican line. Now, I'm not saying that it is you know, what am I saying? Wrong in a sense that some of that budget that could have helped citizens were spent to New Yorkers, were not spent on
Yeah.
New Yorkers. They were spent on migrants, but it wasn't necessarily a crisis that was created by those politicians. This was kind of thrust on New York. Didn't matter if it was
Sure.
a Republican or a Democrat that was in the office at that point. If those places like, Texas and
Well,
whatnot
here's the
started
thing.
busing.
I agree with you, but I think again he's using the populism message
Right,
here. Politicians spend taxpayer dollars on a crisis they created. Remember when that
right,
thing? There is no they, right? People use this they to act like
right,
some magical entity in the sky pulling the strings. That's kind of what
right,
he's saying. He's not specifying which politicians, which states politicians, which party they're from, what level of government there are. He's just saying
right,
they created it, and he's here to save us from they. So that's that
right,
populism thing, right? It's like us against the world. And I got to say,
right.
that does play well with a lot of constituencies,
Sure,
mainly the black constituency here in New York City. If you go into black neighborhoods, what you hear a lot is, how come we never get the services? We never get the
sure,
services in our neighborhoods. Our schools are still failing. We don't got supplies. We need the help, and we haven't gotten it, right? We've been fighting for it for years, for decades, generations, haven't
sure,
gotten it. But now the migrants come in and they're getting everything. Why aren't you spending it on Americans, on New Yorkers who have been here? That is a very
sure.
common refrain in the black community.
And let's be fair. What New York has gone through in the past year and a half with this influx of over 200,000 migrants and the strain on the budget, um, is, people are going to feel that. We talked about it on previous episodes where some budgets in different areas had to be kind of slashed or the money had to be taken from it because it just wasn't enough money. So this will resonate with a lot of people. So, you know, still demonizing it sounds a little bit like a demonization of these migrants, whereas, I wouldn't say that should be the case. But some
Okay,
of the other messages, I'm rocking with some of these other messages here.
let's take a look at make housing affordable. And here you see, if you click on the page,
Dun dun
predominantly,
dun. Where's my guy at?
predominantly,
Rent's too high.
predominantly black men in this photo.
Yeah,
All right.
absolutely. I see that. But I mean, listen, that we know that situations like this or conditions like this disproportionately affect the black community. So there is that opportunity to pick up some support in those areas, especially depending on how you talk about it.
Same way Trump picked up support in the black community, right? I think he's trying to do similar.
Right.
So let's see, empower community boards, local residents, and their council members. That's something we had put out in our policy. And we got that from us.
Let's see it. Um, I mean, this again, some of this looks pretty good.
Repeal the city of yes. So that'll be popular amongst many communities for sure. Ensure residents have a say in their neighborhoods. Okay. Preventing unchecked gentrification. I think that's a good thing.
Sure, absolutely. Re incentivize the rehabilitation of vacant rent-controlled units to get them back on the market. Um, Expand the availability of rent-stabilized units for working families and seniors on fixed incomes. I haven't seen a lot of people mention that type of expanding rent stabilized. Has anyone else said something like that?
Say it again. Expanding rent stabilized.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
Are
big
we
topic
seeing
right
that?
now.
Okay.
So
Um, okay.
I was just, since we don't have a whole lot of time, I was looking at the final page here, education. I'm still waiting for it. I'll be honest. I'm ready to admit almost that I was wrong as far as what I thought I was going to see on here.
Hmm. It it talks a good game. He talks a good game here on the page, right? Platform wise.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
He wants higher
Education,
pay for
invest.
teachers,
I'm sorry.
higher pay for teachers. Okay.
Invest in classrooms, not bureaucrats.
keep
Oh,
merit-based admissions for specialized high schools. Now that I hate how everything is looked at through a partisan lens, but that's the kind of thing that I guess is more commonly associated with the right nowadays.
mm.
I think the right is certainly more united behind that idea of keeping the specialized high schools and standardized tests and things like that.
Yeah, and the right is definitely on this merit-based
Mm-hmm.
rhetoric, which on the surface sounds fair,
Right.
but is not done so in practice.
Audit the DOE, Department of Education, to
Sure.
eliminate inefficiencies and reduce funds directly. I'm sorry, redirect funds directly to enhancing student curriculums.
Listen, I'm
That's
not
not bad.
against that.
That's not bad.
I'm not against that at all. I think, I know Doge is a controversial thing in the way it's being done, but constantly reevaluating spending is something that should be done.
You know what I want to
It
see
just has to
now?
be done smartly.
Sure, I agree. What I want to see now is someone interview him and ask him how he feels about some of these points and see if
Mm,
he argues for them or against them.
mm,
Because, listen, I was wrong in terms of what I thought we were going to see on here. I thought we were going to see angry right wing fanaticism on here.
mm.
Because quite honestly, that's the brand he's most associated with. And I keep saying it may not be fair to him. But when I see people online, right, talking about who they want for mayor, and when they mention him, they tend to be of that ilk, right? They usually
Mm.
hear his name in the same breath as some of those more extreme points of view. His own platform here does not really reflect that. You might be able to pick out a couple things here and there, but
Right.
on the whole, this looks like a pretty moderate, dare I say, even center left kind of platform.
Sure. Sure. Sure.
So I wonder, does he really stand for these issues? We should see him at the debates. And I guess we will have a better chance to do that in the general election if he is the Republican nominee, right? And we'll see what he's
Right.
really advocating for on those stages. We can go back and look at his debate performances from 2021 and see what he was talking. I think he kind of tried to come off as the Trumpian figure there, right?
Right. Like,
That'll be interesting, right? To have the policy on the one hand and kind of like the image and the brand on the other hand, and see how they square or if they're clashing in any way.
right, right. Yes, and like I said, some of these points just don't fit with the stereotypical approach, like in education at the bottom. He's talking about let's revive back the arts. Let's do some work with green space revitalization and vegetable planting. These are things that the right criticized Michelle Obama for
Right.
trying to do. You know what I mean? The Green New Deal is often being criticized by the right. Arts are often being pushed aside for things that are usable skills in the workplace, so to speak. Um,
But that's what I'm saying, though, right? Like the people who are most vocally fighting against some of the things you just mentioned are the
mm.
ones supporting him the loudest. So there's kind of a disconnect there.
Maybe do you think could they be supporting him because he is the Republican option?
That is a big part of it. But again, it's the way he presents himself too, and the people
Mm,
he surrounds himself with. And, he just did a radio show, I believe, co-hosted by another conservative commentator. And I think he speaks on the conservative side of things usually, especially when it comes to national and statewide politics, right? So
mm,
he is kind of taking that side, putting himself on that side as well, aside from just
mm.
running on the GOP line.
Right, right.
And the
I
rhetoric
think
does sometimes sound extreme. He said something that, man, maybe we can pull it up, that I was like, ooh. Um, it was at one of
mm,
these rallies, and I don't want to misquote him, but I should probably Google it really quick so I'm not misquoting him, to be fair. But he was talking about the menu at the schools
mm,
changing as a result of the migrants coming in. Let me see. And I was like, wow, you know, I have a thick skin. I'm a brash New Yorker, but there is a limit. You know what I mean? And
Right.
at a certain point, it comes off as cruel, and that's not cool.
Right, right. Yeah, that is a uh, that's definitely something that's stereotypically that anti-migrant talking point comes off as often as a little cruel and dehumanizing. Um, so I'd be curious to hear what that was that he said here.
Well, as the headline here from 2023, Manhattan DA won't prosecute Sliwa over migrant protest outside Gracie Mansion. So the fact that we're even talking about prosecuting him is kind of crazy.
Yeah, but I think, that depends on what the prosecution was for. I mean, a protest, it doesn't necessarily mean that they were doing anything wrong.
Right. It could be just that they got too raucous and it was, seen as
Right.
incitement of some kind.
So
I'm looking at, hold on, some of these headlines. I'm trying to find.
he's got some good common sense ideas here.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny how different that website looked compared to what the expectations were.
Right. Even though I don't know anything about him and his stance, just the expectation of looking at the Republican candidate in this current climate of Trump Republicans, it's uh, definitely not what I expected. And it's a good thing.
Yeah. And it's also a reality for running citywide in New York City. He's not
Sure.
running in a Republican district, right? He's not even
Right.
running nationwide where there are millions of people who feel this way. I mean, New York City is maybe not the most progressive place on earth, but it is a liberal city, right, for the most part. And so you're not going to
Right.
win with a far right kind of platform here.
Right.
I
So,
can't find. It's funny because I had just seen this article too, not too long ago, and it made me cringe.
uh-oh.
And I can't find it now. I don't know what happened to it, but it was something like they're going to come in and make everyone eat tacos in school or rice and beans or something like that.
Ooh. Yeah, that's very cringeworthy. And on a side note, I would like to have some tacos right now.
Yeah. So we'll get that, but apologies. I do want to apologize for misjudging, I guess, or having a preconceived notion of what it was going to be. That
Right.
platform is not as objectionable as I thought it was going to be. I thought we were going to get Angry Man Yells at Cloud, the website, right? And we didn't get that.
Right.
So,
Right. At
is
least
it
from here, that's not, yeah.
from the website, right? Is it authentic? Look, time will tell. If he is the Republican nominee, then he has until November to make the case. And so we'll see.
All right.
Maybe this will be a softer version of him. Maybe if he thinks he has a more realistic shot this time around, he'll actually temper his rhetoric.
All right.
Maybe he is responding to the mood of the electorate, right? Maybe some of the extreme rhetoric, even on both sides, is out of fashion now, and people are coming to their senses in a way, right? They're being a little bit more reasonable in the way that they're speaking.
It's possibilities. And I think that's, we don't know one way or the other whether that's the case. It could be just, giving some sweet talk here, but that's the point of looking at the nuances of things
Right.
to see. And like you said, he's got till November. I think his actions um, uh, from now until then will kind of illuminate which way he's really leaning on these points. Is this just something that sounds good on the website,
Mm-hmm.
or is it something that he believes in? He's gonna slip here and there if it's a facade. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Did Chat GPT write a moderate Curtis Sliwa platform?
All right. But as it stands,
Right.
um, there's not a lot here that so far, at least from what we looked at, that's uh, objectionable.
That's too crazy. I agree. I totally agree. In fact, it's probably somewhat aligned with some of the other Democratic platforms we looked at.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that tells me there's, that there's possibilities for working together. If some of the Democratic platforms are coming from the same direction as his platform, there's a lot that people can connect on and agree on to actually make things happen that will help New Yorkers.
Absolutely. That sounds almost like a bottom line.
Boom. We work with that. We can rock with that.
All right. Well, where can people find us, Jay?
They can find us on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook at Nuance Show. Join the conversation, especially here, on this platform, and see, you know, was there anything that surprised you and whatnot? And also where podcasts are available.
Yes, as always, we thank you for joining us. We've got work to do, and we'll catch you next time.